You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this underlying expectation of precision. Like it feels almost like engineering, right?
Yeah, exactly. Very cut and dry.
Right. You break your arm, you go to the hospital, they run you through the x-ray machine, and the screen just shows that jagged white line on your radius. And the doctor points at it and goes, there it is. The problem is completely visible.
I mean, it's binary, right? You either have a fractured bone or you don't. The treatment protocol is standard.
And there's this immense psychological comfort in that. We love it when things are visible, when they can be like neatly categorized and put into a box.
Oh, totally.
But then, you step into the realm of psychological well-being and suddenly that pristine x-ray machine is just completely useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Yeah, murky is the perfect word for it.
Especially when you try to pin down something as foundational, but also as, slippery as the concept of self-esteem.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, you can't take an x-ray as someone's self-worth.
Right.
You can't just draw blood to see if their internal monologue is, toxic. And because it's invisible, people tend to treat self-esteem as this mystical, unchangeable trait.
Like you're just born with it.
Exactly, like the color of your eyes, rather than a mechanical system that is actually constantly operating in the background of your mind.
Which is exactly why we are so thrilled to welcome you to the Book Nook. This is our dedicated space for exploring the most impactful, transformative, and occasionally provocative books in self-help, spirituality, psychology, and personal growth.
It's going to be a good one today.
It really is. Today, we are taking our stack of research notes and doing a really comprehensive deep dive into an absolute foundational text in the clinical psychology space. It's called Self-Esteem, a proven program of cognitive techniques for assessing, improving, and maintaining your self-esteem.
Quite a title.
Yeah, it's a mouthful. But we're looking specifically at the 4th edition by Dr. Matthew McKay and Patrick Fanning.
And, it's genuinely a landmark book. I mean, it's sold well over 800,000 copies. And that longevity, it isn't an accident.
No, definitely not.
It manages to successfully bridge this huge gap between high-level clinical psychology and everyday actionable application. Like, it takes theories that were previously locked away in therapists' offices and translates them into a user manual for the human mind.
And our mission for this deep dive is pretty ambitious. We are going to fundamentally deconstruct what self-esteem actually is and, what it isn't.
Which is just as important.
Right. We are going to meet this devastating, often completely silent inner voice that the authors refer to as the pathological critic.
Oh, the critic. We all know that voice.
Unfortunately, yes. But we aren't just going to diagnose the problem. The bulk of our time today is going to be spent unpacking a really highly practical toolkit.
Rooted in 2 major psychological frameworks, right?
Yeah, exactly. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and acceptance and commitment therapy, which is ACT. The goal is to figure out how to rebuild your self-worth from the foundation up. The emphasis really needs to be on that systematic approach, though. I mean, we are moving far, far past the superficial advice that kind of dominates the internet when it comes to self-worth.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to set the stage right now because if you've ever felt cynical about the self-help industry, well, we're right there with you.
Oh, 100%.
This isn't about empty platitudes. We are not going to ask you to stand in front of a bathroom mirror, stare into your own eyes, and shout affirmations like, I am a tiger. I am worthy of infinite wealth.
Please don't do that. That kind of toxic positivity usually backfires anyway.
Right.
If you don't fundamentally believe the affirmation, your brain just rejects it, and you end up feeling even more alienated from yourself.
Exactly. It's like putting a fresh coat of paint over a crumbling foundation. The authors of this book are offering a meticulously researched approach to rewriting the internal code that governs how you value yourself.
And to start deconstructing that code, we have to look at the biggest lie we tell ourselves about self-esteem.
The circumstance myth. Yes, the classic chicken and egg problem. It's the assumption that almost every human being operates under, which is, does academic, financial, and social success foster self-esteem, or does self-esteem foster success?
Because if you look at standard societal metrics, you naturally assume that your circumstances dictate how you feel about yourself inside.
Right. The logic seems airtight. Like, if you finally get that promotion to regional director, if you lose the 20 pounds, if you marry the right person and buy the house with the wraparound porch, then your self-esteem will naturally, inevitably elevate.
It's that classic I'll be happy when trap.
Exactly.
But McKay and Fanning argue that this is entirely backward, or at the very least, it's missing the central engine of how the brain actually processes reality.
They posit a truth that feels radical precisely because it upends our cultural programming. They state that circumstances and self-esteem are only indirectly related.
Wow.
The external world does not have a direct pipeline to your internal sense of worth.
I want to dig into how they illustrate this, because the book uses a really striking comparison. They ask you to imagine a study where you take 100 bank vice presidents and 100 cab drivers.
Okay, good comparison.
Right. If you just look at the surface level metrics, income, social status, education, you would automatically assume the vice presidents have significantly higher self-esteem across the board.
But that assumption completely overlooks the internal reality of the individuals. Among those bank VPs, you are going to find a significant percentage who are secretly, brutally torturing themselves.
It's just miserable.
Yeah. They are sitting in corner offices thinking, I should be the CEO by now. I'm 50 years old and I'm only a vice president. I'm a total failure. My peers are laughing at me. Their high-status circumstance is actually the fuel for their self-hatred.
Meanwhile, in the other group, you have a cab driver navigating city traffic who is thinking, I'm putting bread on the table, my kids are doing well in school, I have a warm home to go to, life is actually pretty good.
And so the individual with lower societal status has a fundamentally higher, more robust level of self-esteem.
Which really forces us to realize that you cannot permanently fix your self-esteem by merely rearranging the external furniture of your life.
No, because if the internal mechanism is flawed, your mind will simply move the goalposts. You get the promotion, and instead of feeling proud, your mind immediately says, well, now I have to prove I belong here, and everyone is waiting for me to fail.
Which introduces what the authors call the 100% rule. And I have to say, in a field like psychology that is usually full of caveats and, it depends, I appreciate how remarkably absolute this rule is.
It is very absolute. The 100% rule states that the intervening factor determining your self-esteem 100% of the time is your thoughts.
Not your circumstances.
Not your circumstances, not your past, not your bank account, your thoughts.
Okay, walk me through the actual mechanics of that. Because if someone insults me, I feel bad. It feels like the insult directly caused the pain. Where does the thought actually come in?
Think of it as a physiological chain reaction. A stimulus occurs in the external world. Let's use the mirror example from the text.
Okay.
You walk into the bathroom and look in the mirror. Light bounces off your face, hits your retina, and travels to your visual cortex. That is the circumstance.
Right.
The image in the mirror is entirely neutral data. But then your prefrontal cortex assigns meaning to that data. It generates a thought.
And that thought is the bridge to the emotion.
Exactly. If the thought is, I look terrible, I'm aging horribly, what a slob, your brain immediately signals your amygdala and your endocrine system. You release cortisol. You physically and emotionally feel a plummet in your self-worth.
That makes sense.
Now imagine looking at that exact same reflection. Nothing physical has changed. The light, the mirror, your face, they are identical. But the thought generated is, okay, I look a bit tired, but this new haircut actually works for me.
So the physiological response changes entirely. Your self-esteem is preserved.
Because the circumstance never dictates the feeling. The only thing that changed in that entire sequence was the thought interpreting the circumstance. That is the 100% rule in action.
Okay, so if thoughts are the ultimate gatekeepers of our self-esteem, that naturally leads to a terrifying question. Who or what is generating all these profoundly negative thoughts?
Right.
Because I certainly don't sit down and consciously decide to mentally abuse myself. It just happens. And the book introduces a concept here, coined by psychologist Eugene Sagan, that puts a face to this phenomenon, the pathological critic.
We all have an inner voice, an internal monologue that helps us navigate the world, weigh options, and stay out of danger. But for individuals struggling with low self-esteem, this internal monologue has been hijacked.
Hijacked by the critic.
Yes. The pathological critic is that insidious, relentless inner voice that attacks, judges, blames, and sets completely impossible standards.
We've all heard the term inner critic before, but what genuinely caught my attention in these notes was the specific methodology this critic uses.
It's very systematic.
It is. It keeps this meticulously detailed, high-definition photo album of every mistake you've ever made, but it conveniently formats your brain to have, total amnesia regarding your successes.
Oh, absolutely.
But the most dangerous weapon it has, and this was a huge realization for me, is its use of shorthand.
The toxic shorthand, yes. This is a brilliant observation by the authors. The critic doesn't always have to deliver a long, eloquent, Shakespearean soliloquy to destroy your mood.
Right, it doesn't have the time.
It operates with terrifying efficiency. Sometimes it just whispers a single word.
Like the word lazy.
Precisely.
Yeah.
If you are sitting on the couch on a Sunday afternoon and the critic whispers lazy, it isn't just a descriptive adjective. That one word is a compressed file containing the weight of a lifetime of parental disappointment.
Ugh, wow.
It instantly triggers the neurological memory of every time you were scolded as a child for not being productive enough.
The book gives this heartbreaking example of a legal secretary. Her critic's favorite shorthand word was screw up.
I remember that case study.
Yeah, and for her, that single word wasn't just about a typo on a document. It encompassed an entire identity. It meant she was incompetent, unliked, and cowardly, which was exactly how she secretly viewed her own father.
That's heavy.
So when her brain whispered, screw up, it was detonating a massive bomb of identity crisis, all disguised as a minor self-correction.
The shorthand is incredibly efficient because it bypasses your logical defenses. If the critic gave a long speech, you might find a hole in the argument, but a single word just hits you in the gut.
Which brings up the origin story. Where does this legacy software come from? Like, was I born with this critic pre-installed in my brain?
To understand its origins, we have to look at early childhood socialization. The authors rely on personality theorist Harry Stack Sullivan, who studied how parents shape infant and toddler behavior using what he called forbidding gestures.
Forbidding gestures like punishments, scolding, a harsh tone of voice.
Or even just a severe frown. Now, put yourself in the mind of a toddler. Your entire survival depends on your primary caregivers. You cannot feed yourself. You cannot shelter yourself.
You're completely helpless.
If your parents abandon you, you literally die. Because of this absolute dependency, parental approval is inextricably linked to survival. Therefore, a forbidding gesture isn't just a correction. To the primitive toddler brain, it is a life-threatening loss of approval.
It signals, I am in danger.
It creates deep, enduring feelings of being not okay. You learn very quickly that certain behaviors threaten your bond with your caregivers and therefore threaten your survival.
But the book makes a massive distinction here, right? Because every parent has to use forbidding gestures to some degree. You can't just let a toddler touch a hot stove.
Of course not.
But the critical variable in how strong the pathological critic becomes is how parents deliver those gestures. It comes down to the fusion of behavior versus identity.
This is perhaps the most crucial pivot point in a person's early psychological development. Does the caregiver differentiate between a bad action and a bad person? If a child runs out into a busy street, a parent can say, running in the street is incredibly dangerous, you get hit by a car. I am angry because you broke the rule. That addresses the behavior.
But if the parent reacts by screaming, what is wrong with you? You are a bad boy for running in the street. That crosses the line. That attacks the core identity.
Yes. The child's brain, which is desperately trying to figure out the rules of survival, internalizes the message, I am bad. The dangerous behavior and the child's identity become completely fused.
So to build on my earlier analogy, the critic is literally an outdated, corrupted operating system.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize it.
It's legacy software that was installed when you were 4 years old, operating on a 4-year-old's desperate need for survival and approval, but now it's trying to manage a 30-year-old's complex life. It's full of bugs, and it crashes the system.
It's using archaic code to solve modern problems.
But wait, hold on. This is where I start to get a little stuck on the theory.
Okay, where are you stuck?
If this voice is just buggy legacy code from childhood, and if it's causing me so much obvious pain, why don't I just recognize it as a glitch and ignore it?
That's the logical response, sure.
Right. If a stranger walked up to me on the street and yelled, "You're a stupid failure," I wouldn't go home and cry. I'd assume they were having a mental health crisis. But when my own critic says the exact same phrase, I accept it as gospel truth. Why does the brain believe a voice that is actively harming it?
You're hitting on the core paradox of the human condition right there.
Right.
Why do we tolerate the internal abuse?
Yeah, why do we?
The author's answer to this question is, frankly, the most counterintuitive and shocking revelation in the entire text.
Yeah.
We believe the critic, we listen to the critic, and we allow the critic to operate because it is actually rewarding us.
Rewarding us by calling us stupid and lazy. I'm sorry, but that sounds completely absurd. How is psychological self-flagellation a reward?
It sounds absurd until you look at the underlying mechanics of behavioral psychology. People with low self-esteem rely on the pathological critic to cope with profound, underlying feelings of anxiety, helplessness, and vulnerability.
So it's a coping mechanism.
Exactly. The critic isn't just randomly being mean, it is serving a function. It is attempting to meet basic psychological needs, albeit in a deeply twisted and dysfunctional way.
Okay, you need to break this down for me because this completely flips the script.
Right.
How does self-attack yield a psychological reward?
The critic employs two primary mechanisms of operant conditioning: positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Let's examine positive reinforcement first.
Go ahead.
How does the critic actually make you feel good? It uses what psychologists call a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement.
Variable ratio. That's the exact same psychological principle behind a casino slot machine, right?
It is identical.
Yeah.
B.F. Skinner proved that if you reward a behavior every single time, the subject eventually gets bored. But if you reward the behavior unpredictably, sometimes it pays out, sometimes it doesn't, the subject becomes obsessively addicted to the behavior. The critic does this by setting incredibly high perfectionistic standards for you.
Oh, I see where this is going.
You must be the perfect, perpetually patient parent. You must be the flawless employee who never makes a typo.
Which is impossible. So most of the time you pull the lever on the slot machine, you fail to meet the standard, and you feel inadequate.
Exactly. You endure day after day of feeling like a failure. But occasionally the stars align. You give a presentation at work that goes perfectly, your boss praises you, you go home, cook a flawless dinner, and your kids actually eat it without complaining.
A miracle day.
In that fleeting moment, you have achieved the critic's impossible standard of perfection.
And the slot machine hits the jackpot. The critic gives you a little pat on the back.
And the resulting feeling is intoxicating. It's a euphoric, temporary sense of supreme worth and peace. It feels so incredibly good to finally be right and worthy that you become addicted to the cycle. The critic is reinforced and allowed to stay in power because every once in a while, it pays out the jackpot. You endure the abuse for the rare high of perfection.
So we tolerate 99 days of being called a failure for one day of feeling like a golden god. That is a dark realization.
It really is.
But you also mentioned negative reinforcement. In my understanding, positive reinforcement is adding something good, but negative reinforcement is taking away something bad, right? Like taking an aspirin to remove a headache. How does the critic act as an aspirin?
Negative reinforcement is about stopping or avoiding a painful feeling. And this is where the critic acts as a highly warped defense mechanism. Let's look at the fear of failure.
Okay, let's say I want to start a business.
Perfect example. Suppose you are unhappy in your career and you want to start your own business. That is terrifying. It requires massive risk, vulnerability, and a high chance of public failure. Your anxiety spikes.
Definitely.
So the critic steps in and says, "Are you kidding? You can't start a business. You're a fraud. You aren't smart enough. You'll go bankrupt." And everyone will say, "I told you so."
And what happens? You listen to the voice and you give up on the dream.
And the exact second you give up, what happens to your anxiety?
It completely drops to zero. The terror of the unknown vanishes because you aren't doing the scary thing anymore.
Precisely. The critic removed the painful feeling of anxiety, so the brain registers the critic as a savior. It says, "See, I saved you from that terrifying risk. I kept you safe in the familiar comfort zone." It's negative reinforcement.
It's protecting you from the risk of living.
Yes.
The text also talks about the fear of rejection, which I found fascinating. They share a case study of a 38-year-old loan officer. He had gone through a really painful, messy divorce. Afterward, he constantly referred to himself, both in his head and out loud, as a loser.
Right, I know this one.
And he realized that if he rejected himself first, it felt like it magically prevented other people from being able to do it.
It's a preemptive strike.
Well-
The logic is, if I already believe I am the ugliest, most unlovable person in the room, then when you inevitably reject me, it won't hurt, because I already beat you to the punch.
That makes total twisted sense.
The book also references a well-known poet who confessed she would constantly put her own work down in public. She had this magical thinking that if she criticized her poetry first, it placed a shield around her that kept critics from attacking her.
So the critic acts as a shield, but it's a heavy iron shield covered in inward-facing spikes. It's cutting you up while you hold it, but you refuse to put it down because you're terrified of the arrows coming from the outside.
That's a profound way to look at it. There is one more major negative reinforcement mechanism: guilt.
How does guilt work here?
The critic punishes you so you can atone for your mistakes. If you snap at your partner, you feel the tension of guilt. The critic steps in and beats you up internally for 3 days, calling you a terrible partner. Eventually, you feel like you've suffered enough to have paid your debt, and the guilt tension is discharged.
Okay, I track the logic entirely, but this raises a massive red flag for me. If the critic is genuinely acting as a load-bearing wall for our psychology, if it's defending us from the terror of failure, preempting rejection, and discharging guilt, isn't it incredibly dangerous to try and dismantle it?
That is a very valid fear.
Like, if we just silence the critic, don't we lose our ambition? Do we just become vulnerable to the world without our spiked shield?
And that's exactly why so many people sabotage their own therapy. The authors are extremely careful to address this. You cannot just forcefully silence the critic, delete the legacy software, and leave a vacuum.
Because nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. If you do, the raw terror of failure and rejection will rush back in, and your brain will panic and reinstall the critic, usually louder than before.
So what's the alternative?
To safely remove the critic, you have to find a way to meet those underlying valid needs. The need for safety, the need for achievement, the need for atonement, in healthier, more sustainable ways.
Okay, I see.
But before you can build those healthy new strategies, you have to fully expose the critic's primary weapons. You have to realize that the protection it offers is actually based on a foundation of lies and warped data.
And those lies are what cognitive psychology calls the cognitive distortions.
Precisely. If the underlying beliefs of the critic are its ideology, the cognitive distortions are its tactical methodology. It's how the critic twists reality to keep you compliant.
Which brings up the concept of the funhouse mirror. McKay and Fanning explain that low self-esteem fundamentally operates like a funhouse mirror at a carnival.
Oh, this is a great analogy.
It artificially magnifies your flaws until they take up the whole reflection, and it shrinks your strengths down to an invisible pinpoint. But the trick is, you usually only look through this mirror at yourself.
Right, not at others.
Exactly. When you look at other people, you see them accurately. You see their mix of good traits and normal human flaws. But when the lens turns inward, reality warps.
And the absolute first step to healing this, the very first CBT intervention in the book, is mapping out exactly what that funhouse mirror is showing you. They call it taking a self-concept inventory.
Getting the data out of your head.
Yes. You have to get the warped data out of your head and onto paper. You list your perceived strengths and weaknesses across various domains. Your physical appearance, how you relate to others, your performance at work, your intellectual abilities.
But the crucial part, the part where the actual debugging begins, is how you write this inventory. You are forced to rewrite your weaknesses using objective, non-pejorative language.
This is where we start disarming the critic's toxic shorthand. The book gives a great example of a woman named Eleanor.
Right, Eleanor.
When Eleanor did her inventory, her critics screamed that she was lousy at arguing. That is a classic, toxic, judgmental label. It carries moral weight. But the exercise forced her to rewrite it by stripping away the emotion and finding the objective behavioral reality.
Right, so instead of lousy at arguing, she wrote, I don't have enough facts at my fingertips to debate effectively, and I lack a killer instinct to go for the jugular, but I also don't get miffed when people disagree with me.
Notice the massive psychological shift there. She took a supposed fatal flaw and broke it down into neutral behaviors. And in doing so, she actually uncovered a hidden strength, her calm demeanor during disagreements.
She turned a weaponized label into a neutral observation.
It's all about demanding accuracy, because the critic thrives on inaccuracy.
Right, and the authors outline 9 specific cognitive distortions that the critic uses to maintain that inaccuracy. We obviously don't have time to do a deep dive into all 9, but I want to highlight the most destructive ones, starting with global labeling.
Global labeling is the cornerstone of the pathological critic. It occurs when you take a single specific behavior or event and use it to permanently define your entire identity. You use absolute toxic words.
So instead of saying, I am ignorant about how to write this specific spreadsheet formula, the critic says, I am a stupid person. Or instead of saying, I felt really insecure during that board meeting, the critic says, I am a total fraud.
It's an indictment of your entire soul based on one data point. It would be like a food critic eating one burnt fry and declaring the entire restaurant, the chef, and the concept of potatoes to be a complete failure.
That's hilarious, but so true. Another incredibly common distortion is filtering.
Filtering is fascinating because it's tied directly to how our neurology processes information.
How so?
Well, the brain has a mechanism called the reticular activating system, which filters out the millions of bits of data we encounter so we don't get overwhelmed. But the critic hijacks this system. It creates a psychological blind spot.
Oh, I see.
You selectively abstract negative facts from reality and completely ignore all evidence to the contrary. It's like driving a car where all the windows have been painted black, except for one tiny peephole that only allows you to see the garbage cans on the side of the road.
You literally don't see the beautiful scenery because your brain has been programmed to only search for the garbage. And then there's mind reading. This one is so common, it's almost a universal human experience. It's projecting your own internal insecurities onto everyone around you.
It happens because you implicitly assume that everyone else agrees with your negative opinion of yourself.
Yeah.
You walk into the break room, a coworker is sitting quietly, and your critic instantly says, he's quiet because he thinks you're an idiot and he doesn't want to talk to you.
When in reality, the coworker might just be worried about his mortgage.
Or nursing a migraine. But the critic convinces you that your darkest fears are objective, proven facts existing in someone else's head.
Which leads perfectly into the final major distortion, emotional reasoning. This is the assumption that because you feel a certain way, it must represent an objective fact in the real world.
I feel like a loser right now, therefore I am objectively a loser.
Right.
It's a devastating neurological loop. It treats your emotions as if they are infallible scientific barometers of external reality. But it completely ignores the entire mechanism we discussed earlier.
The 100% rule.
Exactly. The emotion of feeling like a loser was triggered by the critic's distorted thought in the first place. You have a distorted thought, it creates a bad feeling, and then you use the bad feeling as evidence that the distorted thought was true. It's a closed loop of misery.
So how do we break the loop? How do we actually fight back against this arsenal of distortions? The authors offer a highly practical tool called the three-column technique.
Yes, a classic.
And sticking with my analogy, this is the manual line-by-line debugging of the legacy software.
It's a highly validated CBT exercise. You quite literally divide a piece of paper into 3 columns. When you feel a sudden drop in your self-esteem, you force yourself to stop and write down exactly what the critic is saying in column 1, self-statement.
Let's say you're at a social gathering and you suddenly feel awful. You write, I'm a boring dud. No one wants me here. They are all judging me.
Okay, then you move to column 2, where you act as the diagnostic engineer. You identify the distortions. In this case, I'm a boring dud is global labeling. They're all judging me is mind reading.
Right. And then comes the crucial step. Column 3, the rebuttal. And I love the approach the book suggests here. They don't just say, think positive thoughts.
No, that really works.
They suggest you actually invent a persona to deliver this rebuttal. It's like hiring a really aggressive, highly competent defense attorney to work inside your own brain.
The authors suggest visualizing several distinct archetypes to help you find the right voice. You might channel the healthy coach, who is pragmatic, encouraging, and focused entirely on your actual track record.
I like that one.
Or the assertive agent, who acts like a cutthroat Hollywood agent, shouting your praises and defending your worth against detractors. Or perhaps the compassionate mentor, an older, wiser part of you that offers deep understanding and safety. You use this chosen persona to talk back to the critic in the 3rd column.
So, returning to our party scenario, the thought was, I'm a boring dud. No one wants me here. The rebuttal in column 3, delivered by the pragmatic coach, might be, no, I am just a naturally quiet person who prefers one-on-one conversations over large groups. Furthermore, I have zero objective evidence that anyone here dislikes me. That is just my anxiety talking.
Precisely. You are forcing the emotional critic out of the shadows and into the harsh light of objective behavioral reality.
Okay, but I have a major operational question here. I've tried CBT journaling like this. It sounds incredibly effective on paper, sitting in a quiet room.
But in the real world,
Exactly. Let's be real. What happens when the critic is firing so fast? The book refers to it as chaining thoughts together, that you can't possibly pull out a notebook and analyze them.
it happens all the time.
When you make a massive mistake at work, the critic doesn't just give you one polite thought to analyze, it fires a machine gun of negativity. You're stupid, you're incompetent, your boss hates you, you're going to get fired, you'll lose your house, your partner will leave you. It chains them together in milliseconds.
Yeah, your brain just spirals.
My poor imaginary defense attorney is going to get completely overwhelmed and buried. How does the book address the sheer panic of an attack?
It's a very real limitation of traditional CBT.
Yeah.
Sometimes the internal barrage is simply too intense, too rapid, and too emotionally charged for logical debate.
Yeah.
You cannot outlogic a panic attack.
Right, it's physically impossible.
And this is where the book makes a brilliant and necessary pivot. It moves from cognitive behavioral therapy over to acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
So if CBT is arguing with the software, what is ACT?
To use your analogy, ACT is sandboxing the malware. When you can't out-argue the critic, you have to fundamentally change your relationship to the thoughts themselves.
Oh, interesting.
You stop trying to change the content of the thought, and instead you change how you interact with it using a process called diffusion.
Diffusion. Disempowering the popcorn machine.
That is the perfect metaphor for the human mind. The authors explain that the average human being experiences roughly 60,000 thoughts every single day.
That is a staggering number.
The vast majority of these are completely involuntary. Your mind is essentially a popcorn machine, perpetually popping out random thoughts based on sensory input, memories, and biological drives.
Okay.
The crucial realization is that these thoughts are not reality. They're just localized neural pathways firing in the brain.
Diffusion is about gaining distance from that popcorn. Instead of fusing with a thought like believing the statement, I am stupid, to your very core, you learn to observe the thought as an external event.
Yes, the wording matters.
You shift your language from I am stupid to I am having the thought that I am stupid.
Notice the profound semantic difference there. The phrase I am stupid leaves absolutely no room for doubt or separation. It fuses your entire identity with the concept of stupidity.
It's just a statement of fact.
Exactly. But I am having the thought that I am stupid creates psychological space. It separates your core observing self from the transient mental event. It reminds you that the thought is just a random kernel of popcorn that popped out of the machine. You don't have to eat it.
The book offers some genuinely wild, unconventional techniques for practicing this diffusion. One is simple labeling, just categorizing the thought as it arrives. Ah, there goes a worry thought. Oh, look, a critical thought.
Very mindfulness-based.
Yeah, but my absolute favorite, because it plays with the actual neuroscience of language, is thought repetition.
It is highly effective because it exploits a phenomenon known as semantic satiation. Research demonstrates that if you take a painful, triggering phrase, let's say, I'm a bad father, and you force yourself to repeat it out loud, rapidly, 50 times in a row, something fascinating happens in your brain's language processing centers.
The word physically loses all of its meaning. It just degrades into a sequence of bizarre percussive sounds. Bad father, bad father, bad father, bad father.
Exactly.
It strips the emotional power right out of the syllables. It proves to your brain that the critic isn't speaking absolute truth, it's just making noises.
You break the neural link between the auditory sound of the word and the emotional trauma attached to it. Another powerful diffusion technique they outline is objectifying.
Turning it into a physical thing.
Right. You strip the abstract thought of its power by giving it ridiculous physical properties. The book tells the story of Tony, a man who was constantly plagued by the paralyzing thought, I'm fundamentally stupid. He decided to visualize that thought as a heavy, gray, scratchy medicine ball that made a pathetic, dull thumping sound when it dropped on the floor.
So every time the thought arrived, instead of feeling crushed by it, he just pictured this ugly medicine ball rolling into the room.
By turning the abstract, terrifying thought into a ridiculous physical object, it became manageable. It felt infinitely less threatening.
And then there's the technique of using silly voices.
Yes, a fan favorite.
This is where I was actually laughing out loud while reading the text. The book suggests taking your deepest, darkest insecurities, the things that keep you awake at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, and saying them out loud in a Donald Duck voice.
It sounds crazy, but it works.
Or singing them to the tune of a nursery rhyme like Home on the Range. Oh, give me a home where I'm completely alone because I'm a massive fraud at my job.
It feels utterly absurd to do it, and that is exactly the point.
I just love how irreverent it is. It takes this terrifying, booming voice, like the great and powerful Wizard of Oz commanding you to feel terrible, and it just casually pulls back the curtain to reveal a ridiculous, clunky mechanism pulling levers.
Yep.
You simply cannot be terrified of a thought when it sounds like Donald Duck. It completely breaks the spell.
It breaks the trance of belief. It sandboxes the malware.
Hmm.
Now, once you have learned to step back from the critic's rapid-fire attacks using these diffusion techniques, you finally have the quiet space necessary to examine the underlying architecture the critic uses to judge you.
You can look at the rules of the game.
Exactly.
The book calls this section the tyranny of the shoulds. And I want to spend some real time here because I guarantee that almost everyone listening is currently carrying around a heavy psychological backpack filled with unexamined shoulds.
To unpack this, we have to understand the crucial, defining difference between healthy values and toxic shoulds.
What's the distinction? Because on the surface, I should be a good person sounds like a value.
The distinction lies in the origin and the rigidity of the rule.
Mm.
Shoulds are rigid, unexamined rules that you interjected.
Interjected.
Interjection is a concept from psychoanalysis where you essentially swallow a belief whole without chewing it or digesting it. You absorb rules from your parents, your culture, your religion, or society at large without ever asking if they actually fit who you are.
Oh, I see.
They are absolute mandates. I should never complain. I should always be highly productive. I should be married by the time I'm 30. Because they are absolute and inflexible, shoulds are inherently life-restricting.
Whereas healthy values are fundamentally flexible, they are chosen and owned by you, they are realistic to your specific life context, and most importantly, they are life-enhancing. They pull you forward. They don't beat you down.
The book shares some incredibly relatable case studies to illustrate the hidden, insidious damage that shoulds cause. Take the case of Ellen.
The craftsperson.
Yes. Ellen is a 30-year-old craftsperson. She makes beautiful, customized lampshades. She loves working with her hands, she loves the creative process, and she enjoys her daily life. But internally, she feels like a total failure.
Why?
Because her father was a prestigious academic, and she carries his interjected should. I should be teaching English at a university. I should be using my brain, not my hands.
That is tragic. Her should is literally robbing her of the joy of her actual lived life. She has a life she loves, but the legacy software is telling her it's the wrong life.
And then there is the agonizing trap of dueling shoulds, which is a total psychological nightmare. The book details the case of Janie, a dedicated painter. She recently had a new baby.
Yeah, I remember this one. So tough.
So suddenly she has one massive should demanding you should give all your time, energy, and devotion to your baby. Good mother, sacrifice everything.
Right.
But simultaneously, her artist identity has a should screaming, you should paint as much as you used to. Real artists never stop creating.
It's a completely paralyzing no-win scenario. If she paints, the critic beats her up for neglecting the baby. If she holds the baby, the critic beats her up for abandoning her art. The critic gets to torture her no matter what choice she makes.
To break free from this, you have to actively cut off the should. And the authors provide a method for calculating the cost-benefit of a rule.
How does that work?
You write down the should, and you list the actual positive and negative consequences of strictly following that rule in reality. Usually when you lay it out, you realize the negative consequences of a rigid should the anxiety, the depression, the paralysis far outweigh the supposed moral benefits.
That makes sense.
The authors then suggest replacing the toxic absolute should with a flexible preference.
So instead of saying, I must weigh exactly 120 pounds or I am a failure, you reframe it to, I would prefer to weigh around 120 pounds, but my worth isn't contingent on it.
Exactly. It takes the moral condemnation out of the equation. It lowers the stakes from life or death to simply a preference.
But this brings up a logistical problem. If we spend all this time dropping these external interjected rules, how do we figure out what we actually care about? What fills the void left by the shoulds?
That is where you have to actively construct your own values. The book introduces an exercise called the 10-week log for putting your actual values into action.
Constructing your own values, I love that.
You define the major domains of your life: intimate relationships, parenting, career, recreation, spirituality. And you do the hard work of determining what your true values are in those specific domains. Not what your father wanted, not what Instagram says you should want, but what you want.
And
then, week by week, you schedule small, discrete, measurable actions to move toward those values.
But the authors warn that this isn't a smooth process. When you start taking action toward your true values and abandoning the familiar shoulds, that is exactly when the monsters on the bus show up.
This is one of the most famous and effective metaphors from acceptance and commitment therapy.
Paint the picture for us.
Imagine you were driving a large bus. The destination you are driving toward represents your newly chosen life values. As soon as you put the bus in gear and start driving in a new, authentic direction, these terrifying monsters, which represent your deepest fears, your anxieties, and your pathological critic, crawl out from the back of the bus and start screaming at you.
Oh, boy.
They yell, "You're going the wrong way. You're going to crash. You're not smart enough to drive this bus. Turn back to the old route."
And the natural human instinct when a monster screams at you is to slam on the brakes, stop the bus, and try to kick the monsters out the door.
Exactly. You want to stop and argue with them. You want to prove them wrong before you keep driving.
Sure.
But the core lesson of the metaphor is that you cannot kick them off the bus. They live on the bus.
Right.
If you stop the vehicle to turn around and argue with them, You aren't moving toward your destination anymore. You are
Mhm.
stalled. The vital realization is that while the monsters are incredibly loud and scary, they don't actually have hands. They cannot physically grab the steering wheel.
Oh, I love that.
They can only threaten you. Your job isn't to silence them. Your job is to acknowledge their presence, let them yammer away in the back, and keep driving the bus in your chosen direction anyway.
Let them scream, but keep driving.
Yeah.
That is powerful. But wait, I have to push back on this whole value system.
Bring it on.
What if I genuinely mess up? If we drop all these rigid rules and we're just following our own flexible preferences, how do we deal with legitimate guilt? Like, what if I actually do something hurtful to a friend? What if I violate a value that I genuinely care about? Am I just supposed to Donald Duck my way out of feeling bad? Because that sounds like sociopathy, not self-esteem.
That is the exact friction point where many people struggle with this philosophy, and the authors are very clear that self-esteem does not mean avoiding accountability.
Okay, good.
If you violate a true healthy value that you own, the text offers a specific structured path for atonement. You don't ignore it, you apologize, you make amends that are commensurate with the wrong done, and you learn from it.
So you still take responsibility.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, and this is the crux of the entire book, to truly process our mistakes without destroying our underlying self-esteem, we have to fundamentally redefine what a mistake actually is in the human brain.
Which brings us to the core antidote to the critic, the ultimate weapon, radical compassion and mistake consciousness.
Compassion is the ultimate kryptonite to the pathological critic. The critic can only survive in an atmosphere of judgment, perfectionism, and rigidity. Compassion offers the exact opposite: understanding, acceptance, and forgiveness.
The book breaks down this idea of human worth in a way that I found incredibly liberating, mostly because it exposes the logical flaws in how society operates.
Society's metrics are deeply flawed.
Right. We are implicitly taught from birth that society assigns worth based on an arbitrary, shifting set of metrics. Your virtue, your bank account, your level of physical attractiveness, your power, your job title.
But simple empirical observation proves this societal system false. The text uses a great comparative example of a highly respected pediatrician and a working-class window washer.
Oh, this is a great thought experiment.
Society's rules dictate that the pediatrician possesses more objective worth. Therefore, if worth equals self-esteem, all pediatricians should be walking around with sky-high self-esteem, and all window washers should be miserable and insecure.
But we know for a fact that isn't true. There are deeply miserable, insecure doctors who hate themselves, and there are incredibly happy, grounded, self-assured window washers. The external metric completely fails to predict the internal reality.
Because true human worth is not and cannot be conditional. It cannot be based on behavior, status, or income. The authors argue that your worth must be viewed as intrinsic.
Intrinsic worth.
They use the metaphor of the sun. The sun is always shining, even when it's the dead of night, even when there are massive, dense storm clouds of depression, failure, or tragedy blocking your view of it. The sun itself hasn't diminished. Your worth is a given, simply because you exist as a human being. It is non-negotiable.
That is a beautiful, grounding image. But applying that intrinsic worth to our actual messy mistakes is where the philosophy gets really radical. The text presents what they call a fundamental law of human nature regarding how we make decisions.
Yes, this law is the bedrock of mistake consciousness. It states, you always choose the actions that seem most likely to meet your needs based on your current awareness.
Based on your current awareness, let's chew on that for a second.
It means that at any given moment in time, you are making the absolute best decision available to your brain, given your current resources, your emotional makeup, your level of physical fatigue, your unhealed traumas, and the knowledge you possess in that exact fleeting second.
Okay, I have to step in here, because I can practically hear the audience shouting this question at their speakers.
I think I know what it is.
Wait, if everyone is just doing the best they can based on their limited current awareness, doesn't that effectively excuse terrible behavior? If someone lies to me or steals from me or acts abusively, how on earth do we hold them or hold ourselves accountable if we are all just tragic victims of our own limited awareness?
It is the single most common objection to the concept of radical compassion. But the clarification here is vital to understanding the book's entire philosophy.
Explain the difference.
The text argues that understanding the why behind an action does not in any way remove the consequences of that action.
Okay, break that down.
If you make a terrible mistake and steal money from your company because your current awareness was clouded by a desperate fear of debt, You still face the legal consequences. You might go to jail.
Right.
If you snap and yell at your partner because your awareness was clouded by exhaustion and stress, you still damage the relationship and you must do the hard work of making amends. The behavioral consequences remain entirely intact.
So it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad behavior?
Not at all. What this perspective of current awareness removes is the moral condemnation of your core identity. It separates the behavioral output from the essence of the human being. It allows you to look in the mirror and say, I made a terrible destructive choice yesterday because in that moment, my awareness was severely clouded by fear and trauma. That realization allows for empathy. Empathy for others, and crucially, empathy for yourself. And empathy is the absolute bedrock of self-esteem. You can correct a behavioral mistake without declaring yourself a fundamental monster.
Okay, that makes so much sense. It's the profound difference between I did a bad thing and I'm a bad person. The behavior is flawed, but the sun is still shining behind the clouds.
Exactly. And once you have established that solid foundation of intrinsic worth, you have to learn how to protect it from the chaos of the outside world, because we don't live in a vacuum. Which brings us to the mechanisms of interacting with others.
Moving outward from our own minds. How do we handle external critics? Because unfortunately, it's not just the pathological critic in our own heads that we have to deal with. Sometimes our boss, or our mother-in-law, or a random person on the internet gets in on the action and attacks us.
Oh, the internet is full of them.
Yeah.
The text offers an absolutely brilliant framework for handling this. They call it the screen metaphor. It's rooted in the psychological concept of projection.
The screen metaphor.
Imagine that human beings don't actually experience an objective, shared reality. Instead, every single person is trapped inside their own personal dark movie theater, watching a TV screen inside their head.
And what's playing on their screen?
A movie composed entirely of their own projections, their unfulfilled needs, their past childhood traumas, their unique triggers, their current level of blood sugar, their immediate emotional state.
So it's very subjective.
Entirely. When someone lashes out and criticizes you, they are almost never reacting to an accurate, objective perception of who you are. They're reacting to the warped movie playing on their own internal screen.
Oh, I love this reframing. So let's say my neighbor comes over and absolutely screams at me because my dog barked once. They aren't actually reacting to me or the dog or the objective volume of the bark. They are reacting to the fact that they are terrified of losing their job, they didn't sleep well, and they have a deeply unexamined need for absolute control over their environment to feel safe. The anger is about what's on their screen.
Exactly. Their disproportionate criticism is a reflection of their chaotic internal landscape, not an accurate indictment of your worth as a neighbor.
That provides so much emotional distance. But practically speaking, in the moment, how do we respond? I can't exactly look my screaming neighbor in the eye and say, hey, buddy, that's just a projection on your internal movie screen. That would probably escalate the situation.
Yeah, please don't do that. The book provides two highly practical conversational tools for these moments: acknowledging and clouding.
Let's start with acknowledging.
If the criticism coming at you happens to be accurate and constructive, say your boss points out a recurring error, you simply acknowledge it. You are completely right. I did submit that report late, and I missed the formatting error. I will adjust my workflow to ensure it doesn't happen again.
Notice what happened there. You acknowledged the behavior, but you didn't apologize for your existence. You kept your self-esteem separate from the late report.
Precisely. But what happens if the criticism is heavily distorted, emotionally manipulative, or just plain mean?
That's the hard part.
That's when you use clouding. Clouding is a conversational technique where you agree in part, or in principle, to diffuse the conflict. But you do it without sacrificing your self-esteem or agreeing to their toxic premise. You act like a fog bank. If you throw a rock at a fog bank, it doesn't break. It just absorbs the rock.
Give me a real-world example of clouding, because this sounds like a superpower.
Suppose a highly stressed coworker snaps at you and says, "You are always so unbelievably obsessed with these minor details. You're ruining the timeline and slowing the whole project down."
Classic workplace drama.
Now, you know you aren't obsessed, and you aren't ruining the project. You are just doing quality control. But if you argue, it escalates. Instead, you cloud by saying, "You're right that I do focus very heavily on the details of this project."
You agree with a tiny sliver of the truth. The fact that you focus on details, which instantly takes the wind out of their sails because you didn't fight back. But you entirely reject their toxic labels of obsessed and ruining. The rock just passes through the fog.
It's masterful de-escalation that protects your core. Now, To truly fortify yourself so that you can do this naturally, you have to look at the deepest foundation of your psychology, your core beliefs.
Unearthing the core beliefs. The book suggests using a tool called the monologue diary, where you track your recurring negative thoughts over time, and then you use a diagnostic technique called laddering.
Laddering is like stepping into an elevator and taking it all the way down into the basement of your subconscious.
How does it work?
You take a surface-level negative thought that popped up during the day, and you repeatedly ask yourself two probing questions. What if that is true, and what does that mean to me?
The book uses the example of a man named George. George makes a minor mistake at work, and his critic immediately calls him a chump. Most people would stop there and just feel bad. But George uses laddering. He asks himself, okay, what if I am a chump? What does that mean to me? And the honest answer bubbles up. It means people will always take advantage of me.
Then he takes the elevator down another floor. He asks, okay, what if people constantly take advantage of me? What does that mean? The answer, it means I'll always get the short end of the stick and be left behind.
He just keeps drilling down.
He keeps asking the questions until he hits the absolute bedrock fear. For George, the core belief generating all the anxiety was, I am fundamentally incompetent, helpless, and alone.
That is a terrifying realization. But once you find that radioactive core belief hidden in the basement, how do you actually change it?
You test the invisible rules it created. A core belief always generates behavioral rules to keep you safe. If your core belief is, I am fundamentally unlovable, your brain creates a rule that says, I must never assert myself, make demands, or ask for what I want, because if I cause friction, people will realize I'm unlovable and abandon me.
The book shares the story of Susie, who operated under this exact restrictive rule.
Yes.
So how did Susie debug that rule?
By designing small, scientifically safe behavioral experiments. She decided to test her rule, don't ever assert yourself, in a low-stakes environment. She was at a party with her boyfriend, she was tired, and normally she would just suffer in silence to avoid being difficult.
Right, because of the rule.
But as an experiment, she purposefully turned to her boyfriend and explicitly stated that she wanted to leave the party early.
And the sky didn't fall.
Exactly. He just said, okay, let's grab our coats. She then logged that evidence. She proved to her brain that she could express a need, assert her boundary, and she wasn't immediately abandoned.
That's huge.
Over time, logging dozens of these successful experiments proves the old core belief factually wrong. It overrides the legacy software and builds a new, healthy foundation of self-worth.
It really is like we've been handed the admin passwords to our own brains. We can literally go in, locate the corrupted files, run the debugging software, and rewrite the foundational code of how we relate to ourselves.
Incredibly empowering.
And crucially, it's not just about us. The hosts touch on the final chapter of the book, which focuses on building self-esteem in children.
It's the most vital application of everything we've discussed. Parents are the primary mirrors for their children.
Right.
The reflections we offer them on a daily basis literally become their internal self-image. We are the ones installing their initial operating system.
The book emphasizes using what they call the language of self-esteem, which is exactly what we talked about at the very beginning regarding behavior versus identity.
It comes full circle.
It's about describing the behavior, stating your natural reaction to it, and acknowledging the child's feelings rather than attacking their core identity. So instead of walking into a messy room and screaming, "You are such a messy pig, what is wrong with you?" you pause and you say, "I see clothes all over the floor and I feel frustrated because we agreed to keep this shared space clean."
It seems like a minor semantic difference, but to a developing brain, it is everything. By separating the behavior from the child's identity, you stop the pathological critic from being installed in their minds in the first place. You are giving them the ultimate gift, the unbroken knowledge of their own intrinsic worth.
Okay, let's bring all of these threads together. We've covered an immense amount of psychological ground today. Why does this specific book matter so much in the crowded landscape of self-help? And who is it ultimately for?
This book is essential reading for anyone who feels artificially held back by their own mind. If you are constantly plagued by exhausting perfectionism, if you avoid taking risks or pursuing your passions because you are paralyzed by the fear of failure, or if you are haunted by a silent voice that constantly whispers that you simply aren't enough, this book is the blueprint for your escape.
I think its greatest achievement is that it moves self-esteem away from being this vague, fuzzy, crystal healing concept that you just have to hope for and turns it into a tangible mechanical skill. It provides a literal set of tools, inventories, three-column charts, diffusion exercises, laddering that can be practiced, refined, and mastered over time.
And beyond the tools, it leaves the reader with a profound, paradigm-shifting shift in perspective. A final provocative thought to mull over long after the cover is closed.
Yes, this is the thought I want you, the listener, to take away from our conversation today. What if your pathological critic, that vicious, booming, terrifying voice that has tortured you for years, that has called you lazy and stupid and unlovable, isn't actually a demon that needs to be violently conquered?
What if it's not the enemy?
Exactly. What if it is just a deeply misguided, incredibly frightened part of your own psychology? A part of you that is desperately trying to keep you safe from the pain of rejection and failure, but it's attempting to do so using the only clumsy, outdated, corrupted tools it was given when you were a small child.
It changes the entire emotional landscape. Because once you fully realize that the terrifying, booming Wizard of Oz is really just a scared little kid frantically pulling levers behind a curtain to try and protect you,
You realize you don't have to fight it anymore.
the war ends.
You can just walk behind the curtain, thank the scared kid for trying so hard to protect you, and gently take the wheel back. You can finally drive your own bus.
And suddenly, the murky, muddy waters of psychological diagnosis become a whole lot clearer. The tools are in your hands.
We want to thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly expansive journey today. Please remember to subscribe to the Book Nook so you never miss an exploration of the text that can genuinely change the trajectory of your life.
The journey to self-compassion is a daily practice, but you now have the blueprint to begin building.
And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one. Until next time, be kind to yourselves.